My daughter used to run to me with every crisis, until she learned to call her stepdad for everything. So when she had a medical emergency and called me in a panic, I let it go to voicemail. What happened next was unbelievable. Let me tell you everything now. Before then, I want to quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to David Freeman from Florida. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. My name is David, and I suppose you could say I'm the kind of father who's always believed that love shows up in the quiet hours, in the small, almost invisible ways. Fixing a leaky faucet at midnight because she was too tired to wait for morning. Picking her up from the airport even when I knew I had a full day of work ahead. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being the first one she thought of, the one who would never turn her away. For most of her life, that's exactly who I was. The safe place she could run to, no matter how far she'd strayed or how badly she'd stumbled. But if I'm being honest, and I suppose I have to be honest if I'm going to tell you this right, I started to notice the shift long before I admitted it to myself. You ever feel it? That cold flicker in the back of your mind when someone you love starts to see you as an afterthought instead of a constant? That's what it was like. At first, it was so small I could pretend it wasn't real. She'd ask her stepfather to help her move apartments, and I'd tell myself she was just trying to be polite. She'd send him a photo of her new place before she even told me she'd signed a lease. I'd see his name pop up on her phone and tell myself it didn't matter. But the truth is, it did. It mattered more than I wanted to admit. I don't remember the first time I realized she was turning to him instead of me. It wasn't some dramatic moment. It was a quiet Sunday morning when she called him about a flat tire, and I found out about it days later in a conversation she didn't even think twice about. The way she mentioned it, like it was just another detail of her day, hit me harder than any slammed door or shouted words ever could. Because it told me, in the simplest way, that I wasn't the first call anymore. I'd always told myself I didn't mind, that I wanted her to have people she could rely on, that it wasn't about me. But standing there with the phone in my hand, hearing her talk about how he'd come to her rescue, I felt something in me go quiet. Like a door closing slowly, so softly you almost don't hear the latch click until it's too late. You ever stand in the middle of a room and realize you're just another piece of furniture? That's how it felt. Like I was a fixture in her life, comfortable, reliable, but no longer something she really saw. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to make her see me again without tearing at the fabric of everything I'd built for her. So I did what I've always done. I stayed quiet. I told myself it was just a phase, that she'd come back to me when she needed me. And in the meantime, I kept showing up. I kept answering her calls, kept fixing what was broken, kept being the steady hand she could always reach for, even when she didn't bother to reach anymore. But every time she chose him over me, it was like a tiny betrayal that I wasn't allowed to name. A cut that never fully healed because it was too small, too polite to call it what it was. And in that silence, I started to wonder if I was doing her a disservice by pretending it didn't hurt. If I was teaching her that it was okay to lean on me only when there was no one else left to turn to. The real crack, the one that split the whole thing open, came one night when she called me in the middle of a panic. Her voice was sharp, brittle, like she was trying to hold herself together with words alone. I was in the living room, folding laundry that still smelled like the lavender soap she'd always loved. And I let it ring. I watched her name flash on the screen, felt every vibration in my bones. And I let it go to voicemail. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because in that moment, I needed her to understand that I wasn't going to be her last resort anymore. That if she only saw me when the world was burning around her, then maybe it was time for her to learn what it felt like to face that fire on her own. When I listened to the message later, her voice was small and pleading. "Dad, please," she said. Just those two words. And I think it broke something in me to hear her so scared, to know she still knew how to say my name when it mattered most. But I didn't call back. I sat there in the dark, the laundry forgotten at my feet, and I let the silence settle around me like a promise I was finally willing to keep. I wish I could tell you I didn't feel guilty. I wish I could say I didn't want to run to her, to wrap her up and tell her everything would be okay. But I've spent too many years being the one who always showed up, no matter how many times she forgot I was there. And I was done. Done being the last call when she'd already given everything else to someone else. Done pretending that being her father meant being invisible until she needed me. So that night, I let the phone keep ringing. I let her face whatever it was she was so afraid of. And in the quiet that followed, I realized that maybe I wasn't the one who needed to be there for her anymore. Maybe it was time for me to learn how to be there for myself. I didn't vanish from her life in some dramatic burst of anger or some loud, final goodbye. I didn't slam doors or shout truths she wasn't ready to hear. No, I faded the way an old photograph does, slowly, edges first, until what was once sharp and bright was nothing but a faint outline. I pulled back piece by piece, almost like I was testing whether she'd even notice if I wasn't there anymore. And for a long time, she didn't. Or maybe she did, but she didn't care enough to say so. I stopped offering to fix the small things in her apartment, those leaky faucets, the squeaky doors she used to complain about when she'd call me late at night. I stopped asking how she was sleeping, whether her new job was treating her well, or if she'd eaten anything more substantial than coffee and leftover takeout. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about unhooking myself from the idea that she'd only see me if I was always there, always ready. Because I'd started to realize that no matter how many times I showed up, it was never going to be enough to make her look at me the way she used to. The first few days of that withdrawal felt like a betrayal of everything I thought it meant to be her father. I'd spent so many years being the steady hand, the quiet presence she could always count on. And even when she stopped calling me first, I didn't stop showing up. It felt like a duty I couldn't shake. But when I finally let myself step back, when I let the silence settle in the spaces she used to fill, I started to see that it wasn't about being her father. It was about being her fallback. And I was tired of being the thing she turned to only when there was no one else left to answer. You ever sit in a room that used to be so full of someone else's laughter and feel the way it echoes even after they're gone? That's what it was like in my house in those early days. Her laughter still hung in the corners, in the worn-out couch cushions, in the half-empty mug she'd forgotten to take with her the last time she visited. I let those echoes stay. I didn't try to erase them or fill the space with something else. I let them be reminders, not of what I'd lost, but of what I was letting go of. I started filling my days with things that had nothing to do with her. Small things, like finally finishing the book that had been gathering dust on my nightstand for years. I started walking in the mornings, the cold air waking me up in a way no phone call or late-night emergency ever could. I cooked meals for myself, real meals, with real effort, because I realized I didn't need someone else to sit across from me to make it worth the work. And every time I chose to be present in my own life instead of waiting for hers to need me again, it felt like another quiet victory. I didn't tell her I was pulling back. I didn't announce it or make some big show of it. I just stopped answering every call. Stopped filling the silence with my own voice when she didn't bother to reach for it. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more I realized how much of my life had been spent waiting for hers to include me again. The more I let myself stand still, the more I started to see that maybe she was never going to look for me in the way I needed her to. It wasn't anger that kept me quiet. It was the calm that comes when you finally stop trying to fix something that's never going to be the same. Because that's what I'd been doing for so long. Patching up the holes, smoothing over the cracks, pretending that if I just tried hard enough, I could hold it all together. But I was done patching, done smoothing. I was ready to let the cracks show and learn how to live in the spaces they left behind. I still thought about her every day. I still wondered what she was doing, whether she was happy, whether she missed me in the small, dark hours when everything else fell away. But I stopped letting those thoughts drag me back into her orbit. Because I was starting to see that my life didn't have to be an echo of hers. It could be something else, something mine. The thing no one tells you about pulling back is that it doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like grief. It feels like losing a piece of yourself that you thought you couldn't live without. But in that grief, in that small, painful silence, I found something I didn't know I'd been looking for. I found a man who wasn't just a father, a man who deserved to be seen, even if the only person who could see him was himself. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I didn't recognize the man I was becoming at first. He felt like a stranger in my own skin, Someone who didn't jump at the first sign of need, who didn't measure his worth by the number of times he picked up the phone. But as the days stretched on, I started to see that maybe that man had always been there, just buried under years of saying yes when I should have said no. He was quiet, patient, and maybe a little bit worn around the edges. But he was mine, and I was learning to let him breathe. I started to find small ways to claim the silence that had once scared me. I'd wake up before the sun, when the world was still soft and half asleep, and sit by the window with a cup of coffee in my hands. I watched the light creep across the floorboards, turning everything gold and warm. And in those moments, I felt something like peace. It was a small thing, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for her to need me to feel like I had a place in the world. I took up woodworking again, something I loved when I was younger but had put away when life got too busy. My garage became a small sanctuary, the smell of sawdust and cedar filling the air like a promise of something new. Each piece I made was a quiet testament to the fact that I could still build something with my own two hands, something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. You ever feel that? That moment when you realize you're still capable of creating, of shaping something real out of nothing? It felt like coming home to a part of myself I'd almost forgotten. Therapy was something I never thought I'd need. I'd always seen myself as the strong one, the one who didn't crack, who didn't let the weight of things show. But when I sat in that small, quiet room and spoke the truth out loud, I realized how heavy it had all become. How much I'd been carrying in the name of love, and how little of it had been for me. My therapist asked me once why I kept picking up the phone, why I kept making myself the safety net even when it hurt. And the only answer I had was, because I thought that's what it meant to be a father. But the truth was simpler than that. I was afraid that if I stopped showing up, she'd stop needing me at all. That was the hardest part to admit. That I'd built my whole life around being the one she turned to when the world fell apart. That I didn't know how to be anyone else. But in that quiet room, I started to see that maybe it wasn't about being her father the way she wanted me to be. Maybe it was about being the father I needed to be for myself. The kind of man who knew how to love without disappearing. I started to say no more often. Not because I was angry, but because I was tired. Tired of being the easy answer to every question she didn't want to face. Tired of being the one who cleaned up the mess when she didn't even notice I was there. Saying no felt like learning a new language. Awkward at first, but freeing in a way I hadn't known was possible. Every time I said it, I felt the ground under my feet get a little more solid. I still loved her. I knew I always would. But I was done chasing after the pieces of her life she only handed me when they were too heavy for her to hold. I was done measuring my worth by how quickly I could fix what she didn't want to face. I wanted her to see me as more than just a fallback, more than just the last name on her list when everyone else was busy. I wanted her to see me as a man who had built his life around love, and who was finally learning that love didn't have to mean losing yourself in someone else's shadows. So I pulled back a little more. I let the quiet grow between us, not as a punishment, but as a boundary. A promise to myself that I wouldn't keep showing up for someone who didn't see me until she needed me. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't known I was missing, the strength to stand in my own life, even if it meant standing alone. It didn't erase the hurt. It didn't make everything okay, but it felt like the first honest breath I'd taken in years. And in that breath, I started to believe that maybe I wasn't the one who needed to change. Maybe it was her turn to learn what it meant to miss someone who had always been there, even when she hadn't known how to see it. The night she called, it was late enough that the world outside was nothing but soft shadows and the distant hum of cars on the freeway. My phone sat on the kitchen table, face down, like it had been for weeks. I'd stopped carrying it with me everywhere, stopped letting it anchor me to her needs. I was in the garage, the smell of cedar and fresh stains still on my hands, when I heard the first ring. My heart jumped the way it always did, even though I'd told myself I was done letting it control me. I didn't move. I just listened. You ever hear a phone ring and know exactly who's on the other end without even looking? That's what it was like. Her name was a ghost in the room, a weight in the quiet. And I didn't reach for it. I let it keep ringing, each vibration a choice I was making over and over again. When it stopped, the silence that settled felt like a promise I'd made to myself finally being kept. Later, When I finally played her voicemail, her voice was small and shaking. "Dad, I'm scared," she said. I didn't know who else to call. Just those words, no details, no apologies. It was enough to make my chest tighten, enough to remind me of all the nights I'd driven across town just to see her safe, to see her smile again. But I didn't call back, because I'd already decided that I couldn't keep being the one she only thought of when there was no one else. I went for a walk after I listened to it, the cold night air cutting through the haze of memory and guilt. Each step felt like a confession, like I was admitting to the world that I was done playing the part of the father who never said no. I didn't know her my silence anymore. Didn't know her the comfort of knowing I'd always be there no matter how many times she turned away. I owed myself the right to live my life without waiting for hers to make room for me. The next morning, her stepfather sent me a message. "She's okay. She's at the hospital, but she's okay." No explanation. No invitation. Just a line that felt like it was written in stone. I read it twice, my thumb hovering over the reply button. But there was nothing to say. Nothing that wouldn't pull me right back into the cycle I'd been working so hard to break. I didn't go to the hospital. Didn't send flowers or a card. I let the quiet be the answer. Because sometimes that's all you have left, the quiet, and the choice to let it be enough. I made breakfast that morning like I always did, the smell of eggs and coffee filling the house with something warm and real. I sat at the kitchen table, the light soft and easy, and I felt, not relief, exactly, but something like resolve. Like I'd finally stopped trying to fix what she'd never asked me to fix in the first place. You ever sit in a room that used to be filled with someone else's laughter and realize you're okay with the way it echoes now? That's what it felt like. I still loved her, God, I always would. But I was learning to love myself enough to stop picking up the phone every time she called. To stop answering just because she was scared. Because I was tired of being the last name she thought of when the world fell apart. I knew there'd be a reckoning. That she'd come to me sooner or later, wanting answers I didn't owe her. But for now, I let the quiet do what it needed to do. I let it settle around me like a second skin, something I didn't have to be afraid of anymore. And in that silence, in that soft and brutal quiet, I found the first real peace I'd felt in years. She showed up at my door 2 days later, the rain coming down in steady sheets that blurred her shape into something half forgotten, half expected. I watched her from the window for a moment, the way her shoulders hunched against the cold, her arms wrapped tight around herself like she was holding in everything she couldn't say. When she finally knocked, it was soft, like she didn't know if she was allowed to be there anymore. I opened the door and stepped back without a word, letting her in out of the rain because some habits don't break all at once. She stood there in the doorway, dripping water onto the hardwood, her hair plastered to her forehead. Her eyes were wide and uncertain, darting around the room like she was trying to find the version of me she used to know. I waited. I let the silence grow, let it stretch out between us like a truth we'd both been too scared to speak. When she finally looked at me, her voice was small, barely more than a whisper. "Why didn't you answer?" she asked, her throat catching on the last word. I took a slow breath, feeling it settle deep in my chest. "Because I needed you to feel what it's like when I'm not the one who always picks up," I said. My voice was calm, even. Not angry. Just tired. "I needed you to know I'm not here just to catch you when everyone else can't." She flinched like I'd struck her, but she didn't look away. "I was scared," she said, her words tumbling out too fast, too raw. "I didn't know what else to do." "I know," I said quietly. "And that's the problem. You only remember me when you're scared. When there's no one else left. But I remember you all the time, Lily." "That's not the same thing." She pressed her lips together like she was trying to hold in the apology I could see in her eyes. I didn't want to hear it. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need it. I'd spent too long making excuses for the way she'd stopped seeing me as someone worth turning to first. I wasn't going to make them for her anymore. "I'm not angry," I said, because I could see the fear in her face. "I'm just done being the one you call when there's no one else left to answer. I love you. I'll always love you. But I won't keep pretending that means I have to be your last choice." She took a step toward me, her hand half extended like she didn't know if she was reaching out for me or for the version of me who'd always said yes. I didn't step back, but I didn't move to meet her either. I let her hand fall back to her side, The space between us as final as any goodbye we could have spoken. I didn't know, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't realize how much it hurt you. I know, I said softly. But it did. She looked around the room then, her eyes lingering on the small things she'd stopped noticing years ago, the guitar propped up in the corner, the half-finished mug of coffee on the table, the faint scent of cedar from the garage. I think in that moment, she realized that my life didn't stop when she stopped looking for me. That there was a whole world here she'd never bothered to see. She didn't say goodbye when she left. She didn't have to. The rain swallowed her up as she walked back down the steps, her shoulders squared like she was carrying the weight of everything she hadn't said. I watched her go, the door closing soft and final behind her. And I felt, not relief, not pride, just a kind of quiet that settled over everything, the kind of quiet that comes when you stop waiting for someone else to fill the silence. The fallout wasn't loud. There were no slammed doors, no shouted accusations. Just the quiet truth that some things don't get fixed just because you want them to. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the real healing isn't about stitching things back together. It's about learning how to live with the pieces. I sat down on the couch after she left, the room still echoing with the way her voice had sounded when she asked me why I didn't pick up. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to have an answer for her. Because I knew, deep down, that I'd already given her everything I could. And that now, I was finally learning how to keep something for myself. The days after she left felt like standing on the shore of a lake that had gone still after a storm. There was no more rain, no more wind, just the quiet rippling of the water, gentle and steady. I woke up each morning to the same small rituals. Coffee brewing in the kitchen, the light creeping across the floorboards, the weight of my own breathing in the calm. It wasn't that the pain had disappeared. It was just that I'd stopped trying to fight it. And in that surrender, I found a strange kind of peace. You ever realize you spent so long waiting for someone else to make you whole that you forgot you were already complete? That's what those days felt like. I didn't hear from her, and I didn't reach out either. I stopped checking my phone for her name, stopped wondering if the next knock on the door would be her coming back to try again. I let the silence be what it was, a quiet testament to the boundaries I'd finally learned to draw. I filled the days with small, deliberate choices that had nothing to do with her. I started cooking real meals for myself again, meals that took time and care, even if I was the only one eating them. I'd set the table for one and sit there in the soft glow of the lamp, the quiet around me no longer a threat but a comfort. I planted more herbs in the garden, watched them reach for the sun with a stubbornness that felt like mine. And every time I saw a new sprout pushing through the soil, it felt like a promise that life keeps going, even when you think you've run out of ways to start over. One morning, I found a letter from her in the mailbox. The envelope was plain, her handwriting small and careful like she was afraid of saying too much. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to explain. She just said she was sorry, that she understood why I didn't pick up, that she knew now how much I'd given and how little she'd seen it. I read it once, let the weight of those words settle in my chest, and then I tucked it away in a drawer. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to hold on to it. The apology was hers to give, not mine to keep. I didn't write back. I didn't feel like I needed to. Because closure doesn't always come in the form of a conversation or a clean ending. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to stop letting someone else's choices define your worth. To stop waiting for them to see you the way you've always seen them. And in that decision, I found a kind of freedom I hadn't known I was searching for. I still think about her sometimes. The girl who used to run to me with every scraped knee and every heartbreak. The girl who learned to turn away because it was easier than staying close. But those memories don't ache the way they used to. They feel softer now, like old songs you can't help but hum along to, even if you don't play them out loud anymore. I think that's what healing really is, not erasing the past, but learning how to live with it without letting it take you under. The house is quiet these days, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels like mine. Like every breath I take here is a choice I'm making for myself, not for anyone else. And in that choice, I found something I didn't even know I'd lost, my own voice, steady and clear in the quiet. If you've ever had to choose between holding on and setting yourself free, then you understand what it means to walk away from the familiar and step into the unknown. That's the real fight. Finding the courage to claim your own peace, even when it feels like a betrayal. If this story spoke to something deep inside you, If you felt those words echo in your own silences, then maybe stay a little longer. I share stories like this every day about the quiet kind of bravery and the kind of love that begins with yourself. Tap that subscribe button. Let's keep finding the strength in the stillness together. See you soon in the next story.